Senator Bernie Sanders campaigning for the Harris-Walz ticket in Wisconsin today. Emily Byer joins us now live outside the UW Oshkosh Culver Welcome Center with the highlights of his visit. Emily.
Bill, Bernie Sanders taking the stage here just moments ago, but he took time to talk with us one-on-one first. He's here to encourage people to get out and vote early. He's talked about how he believes Harris and Walz are the clear choice this November for president and vice president. Here's what he shared with us when asked about what Wisconsinites should keep in mind when they go to the polls this November 5th.
This is the most consequential election in our lifetimes. I think if you believe in democracy and don't think it's appropriate to have a president who tried to overturn the results of the last election, I think you got to vote for Kamala. I think if you believe that women have a right to control their own bodies and not the government, you got to vote for Kamala.
Wisconsin Republicans commenting on Sanders' visit, saying, quote, "At every turn over the last 4 years, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have catered to Bernie Sanders and his extreme agenda. Voting for Harris would ensure Sanders' vision of higher taxes, increased wasteful spending, and an unaccountable bureaucracy is realized," end quote. Now, Sanders will head south to continue his support of the Democratic nominees. He's expected to talk later in the Madison area to supporters. Reporting live in Oshkosh, Emily Byer, Action 2 News.